Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. And that's, first of all, to those who are in the School of Economics at UCT and also everyone who's online this evening. Thank you very much to all of you for joining us. I can't think of a more important topic to come to grips with at this time. We're privileged to have with us this evening Nelson Muffuh, who has been the UN resident coordinator in South Africa since the end of 2022. He's known, and I suspect he's going to find this slightly embarrassing, but it's nonetheless true, as a visionary strategic influencer for global development. And he has managed to maintain that reputation through a whole series of different roles in the United Nations system, and before that in Christian aid, over a considerable period of time. The UN resident coordinator, because it's a rather awkward title in reality, but his job is to lead the UN country teams in a particular country and coordinate UN support in implementing the 2030 agenda, which is, of course, in part the Sustainable Development Goals, probably the largest part. Before he assumed his post in South Africa, he was head of office and principal advisor to Amina Mohammed, who was, of course, the UN Deputy Secretary General. And as those of us who know her know, she has played a mighty role in enabling the whole of the Agenda 2030 process to proceed in many different ways. Nelson has also served as regional advisor for communications, advocacy, and media for the United Nations Population Fund in Western Central Africa, the head of outreach and stakeholder engagement for the post-2015 development planning and coordination, regional coordinator for Africa of the United Nations Millennium Challenge, and senior advocacy coordinator at Christian Aid. Just in case you don't find that enough, he was also educated both at the University of Sussex, which he shares with an enormous number of people in the first generation of the South African government, and subsequently at the Freie Universität Berlin. So he is able to provide perspective, insight, and context in a wholly remarkable way. So let's try and get to grips with the issue. The UN Summit for the Future has a rather curious history in a certain sense. Originally, on the 75th anniversary of the United Nations, which was, of course, 2019, before COVID, there was a process of consultation that took place on a very large scale across the entirety of the UN system for the purpose of enabling the Secretariat to be able to produce a report as to what needed to be done for the next 75 years of the United Nations life. And member states came to recognize at the celebrations for the 75th anniversary that there was a need for a summit to consolidate reporting that the Secretariat was doing, framed in a fairly remarkable document called Our Common Agenda. Now, I'm not going to talk about any of the detail on this. That is what our guest this evening is going to unpack for you in significant measure. But this comes at an absolutely critical moment for Africa. It's perfectly clear to everyone, I think, that the global South, and Africa in particular, is significantly disadvantaged by the structural framework of the multilateral system under present circumstances. And this is the opportunity to engage with that challenge in a constructive way. Not to complain, not to regret, not to carp, but in fact to seize the day and do something about it. So that's the purpose of what we're going to speak about this evening. I may point out that one of the reasons why we've reached out in the way in which we have to try to ensure that we have a large number of young people here is precisely because this is about the future. People like me are going to be dead in 25 years. We're not going to be able to do anything about it. The future is in the hands of those of you who are probably under 35 today. And therefore, please, in the course of what you hear this evening and in the way in which you engage this evening, don't feel that your voice doesn't count. This is your chance to actually shape a future for you and those close to you. So with that, if I may, I'm going to invite the UN resident coordinator, Nelson Muffuh, to come up and to deliver his address. Thank you, Nelson.
Thank you so much, Sean, for that. It's such a pleasure to join you this evening to have a conversation about what is something that we have been preparing for quite a while. Very important for what I would term current and future generations. I'm Nelson Muffuh. As you heard, I am the resident coordinator of the United Nations based in South Africa, and also the representative of the Secretary General here, working to ensure that the UN is really working together and delivering as one, accompanying South Africa's socioeconomic and sustainability transformation. So I always cherish the opportunity to come, meet, engage, interact with an audience that I hope are all, when they say preaching to the choir or to the converted, I think if you're in this space, it's because you're already a humanist and someone who really believes in collaborating and playing your part in making a difference for people and planet. I look forward much more to the interactive part of this conversation, being challenged, but also being complemented by Karabo, and also taking comments and questions from you all in the audience, especially the young people. So I would hope that when we come to that part, Sean, we will hear first from the young people in the room, because talking about the Summit of the Future, as the Secretary General has said, it's really about thinking about a different way of planning and collaborating using the tools, the assets, and the stakeholders of today, rather than the systems of our grandparents. And over the last few weeks, as the UN in South Africa, we've been doing a number of convenings in Pretoria, in Johannesburg, to talk to different stakeholders and young people, especially about what sort of outcomes would work for them from the Summit of the Future that takes place in under 3 weeks in New York. And one striking quote or proverb that I heard was the fact that we have a responsibility as a generation now to take care of the land, not because our grandparents gave it to us, but because it is loaned to us by our grandchildren. So we need to think about that responsibility to do better. And as we meet here today, I would want to say we're doing so on borrowed time, because we're at a critical point in history where the decisions we make, where global leaders make, where civil society leaders, private sector leaders, the decisions they make will fundamentally shape not only our world, but the world of future generations. So we have a responsibility to do right by people and planet. And when leaders meet in New York in 3 weeks, they would be doing so off the back of an outcome that is currently being negotiated and will be signed, sealed, and delivered before they even come and meet by their representatives in New York. So it's not the summit itself that will determine the outcome. The summit is really being convened to talk about the implementation of what is being determined right now. And we have a proposed version 3 of this outcome document, which hopefully will be resolved in the next week or two. And this outcome is what I will be talking a little bit about, but much more importantly, how we can collectively play our part in implementing it. I'm not going to, hopefully I will not use all the allotted 30 minutes, but keep it shorter so that we can have more of an interaction. But Sean already laid the premise of what this is all about. And I hope you had an opportunity to read a little bit and reflect about what is the Summit of the Future and why are we even talking about the Summit of the Future. This emerged when the UN was approaching 75 years since 1945. And the Secretary General thought, why don't we propose what is being called our common agenda? An agenda that would help put on the table how multilateral cooperation should be organized going into the future. First, to turbocharge the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. We have that, which has a timeline for 2030. So it's really not about talking about a new agenda for development, but how do we reinforce multilateral cooperation to deliver on the Sustainable Development Goals and the Paris Climate Agreement. Then to also talk about a new agenda for peace, a new way of approaching peacekeeping, peacemaking, peace operations, because frankly, the UN's work on peacemaking recently is not delivering for people. And there's mistrust, distrust, and disillusionment with that system, and it needs to be updated. But above all, it was also about looking at ways of dealing with emerging and anticipated challenges that the world is currently not facing. How do we take advantage of artificial intelligence and digital cooperation, for example? We're going through another revolution, not the Industrial Revolution this time, but another revolution which presents an opportunity. Are we going to be led by technology, or are we going to shape how technology benefits mankind or humankind? Let me be correct in what I'm saying. And also how we ensure that the way we collaborate takes cognizance of the fact that we're in a world of today, not in the world of 1945. Global governance arrangements and the global financial or financing for development architecture as well. And we will go into that in a little bit. So the summit recognizes that power relations need to change to reflect and adapt to the realities of today, and that we need to work to deliberately shape our collective response to the challenges in the year ahead. So foresighting is also important, and anticipating what needs to be done to face future challenges and how young people play their part in determining that. And the Summit of the Future gives us this platform where we also have to reaffirm the commitments that were made around the formation of the UN, the Charter of the UN, because we're not adhering to the Charter right now. And so how do we ensure that promises that were made are promises that are being kept, in as much as we look into planning for the future? So I'm always reminded when I talk about these things, about the question, if not now, then when? And if not us, then who? Who else has that responsibility, like Mandela said, to create a better world for the people who live in it? It is our collective responsibility. It is your collective responsibilities to be able to do that. And if the elders are failing or have failed you, then it does not mean you have to accept that. And so that's something we need to think about going forward. And we cannot waste this opportunity presented by the Summit of the Future to collectively chart the approaches that we need to take that will benefit humanity, especially our continent, Africa, and other developing countries, of course. Because if it is about rebalancing power relations that haven't worked well for people, then we need to think about what we need to be doing differently going forward, and the agency that we need to be driving. And so the United Nations leadership is keen to ensure that the Summit of the Future is precedent setting in 5 main ways, and I'm going to try to very briefly go into that. The first being that the summit reminds us that there's no shortcut to a better future if we do not achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. We have 17 goals, which I call the to-do list for people on the planet, that range from ending poverty to advancing human rights, to looking at how we produce and consume, to looking at the sort of energy we use, how we organize our cities, what we do about education and food systems. And so it behoves on us to be able to accelerate progress on that, because we're not on track to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. 17% of the targets, 169 of them, we're making progress on those. 17%, we're regressing. And in about half of them, there's marginal or moderate progress being made. And 6 years to the 2030 deadline, there's much more we need to do. In the South African context, from 64% of the targets being met in 2019, at last time the SDGs report for South Africa was done last year, it has increased to 72%. So there's progress, but not as quickly as we need the progress to be made. So there's a lot more that needs to be done. And the summit gives us that opportunity to pause, look at what countries need to do better at the global level to address the Sustainable Development Goals and climate action, because we have no choice but to live more sustainably and to tackle climate change. And progress is necessary through collective action, involving all stakeholders, with young people in the lead. The second aspect is the fact that we are in a context where we're experiencing persisting and complex conflicts that are not going away. So there's a need for a new agenda for peace, a new approach to looking at conflict mediation, prevention above everything else, and how we manage resilience building out of conflicts as well. And at the heart of it is the United Nations Security Council, which is not working as we need it to. It was shaped at a particular time, 1945, without Africa having a seat, a permanent seat certainly, or with veto power for that matter. And so the world cannot continue to function in a way that does not reflect the realities of today. It's a colonial prism through which, in hindsight, you're looking at it now. I'm not saying at the time it was set up, wrong decisions were made. I'm just saying it hasn't evolved as quickly as it needed to. So the second aspect is really about a new approach to peacemaking, peacekeeping, and managing conflict, which, as the African Agenda 2063 says, we need to be able to silence the guns, and we need to be able to do that with African countries and stakeholders playing a lead role in doing that. And so the Security Council reform is very important. Thirdly, I mentioned the importance of technology and taking advantage of the opportunities that technology, digital connectivity presents. The dangers of it, no doubt, but certainly also the opportunities it presents. And this is especially an area where young people and their innovation and their understanding and grasp of the opportunities it presents can help certainly humanity leapfrog and do things better into the future, from education to energy to agriculture to smart cities and what have you. So we have an opportunity there to ensure that as we use technology, including artificial intelligence, we're not locked into the inequalities of old, but really looking at opportunities that present themselves going forward, and that responsible governance and equitable use of technology is ensuring that humanity is better served and that collectively we're making progress. I already talked about the reform, and this is the fourth aspect of the Security Council, so global governance, but there's also the need to reform the financial architecture under which we're governed. How is the World Bank, IMF, and others structured and governed? Are they really responding to the needs of developing countries as of today and going into the future? And what needs to be done to ensure that they evolve to address the injustices of our time? So one of the things the Secretary General is also pushing, and the South African government for that matter, is reform of the global financial architecture. Financing for development and for climate change comes to the fore, beyond just looking at official development assistance, but also other streams of financing, concessional loans, carbon markets, debt management that will be beneficial to all of us and our future as well. And the fifth and last aspect is really about ensuring that we have multilateral cooperation that is inclusive and focusing really on the aspirations and the contribution of women and young people. The Secretary General talks about network multilateral cooperation that recognizes the fact that it's not only about governments and the role they have to play, not only about the private sector and the role they have to play, but also the role that people, and especially young people and women, have to contribute. And if we look at our demographic dynamics, young people currently and into the future will be the largest cohort on the African continent, certainly, that need to be playing a part in shaping and leading whatever we're doing. And so, friends, ladies and gentlemen, I already mentioned the fact that we're not on track with regards to progress on the Sustainable Development Goals. There's some setbacks, but there's also hope. And in the South African context, the triple challenges is something that we need to have at the back of our mind when we're looking at multilateral development cooperation. And when I talk about the triple challenges, I hope you're all aware of what I'm referring to. Heightened inequalities, persisting poverty, and discouraging unemployment, particularly for young people, and so how that is addressed and how a global agreement serves better South Africa and its aspirations. Inequality is widening, like I said, not only in South Africa, but across the continent. Poverty is increasing despite the progress that has happened in some parts. COVID, to some extent, exacerbated some of these challenges. And prosperity, unfortunately, is not being as widely shared as it needs to be. And this is tied to the inequalities. Some are getting richer, not enough are getting out of poverty. And so what do we need to do about that? And faced with these challenges, which are interconnected, last year at the Sustainable Development Goals Summit in New York, the Secretary General called for a rescue plan for people and planet, which said we really needed to engineer a paradigm shift. Business as usual, no longer being tenable. And what does that mean? And how can the Summit of the Future support that effort? How can governments around the world and people around the world work on the transitions that are needed? And he's advancing 6 transitions, core transitions on the Sustainable Development Goals: on education, on food systems, on energy, on digital connectivity, on job creation and social protection, and on environmental protection, with the argument that focusing on these 6 entry points, which are catalytic and interconnected, we can make quick progress on all the other Sustainable Development Goals and the challenges that humanity is facing. It looks at persisting problems, but also emerging opportunities that we need to be working on going forward. And that's why the Summit of the Future will not only look at a new agenda for peace as one of its outcomes, or a declaration on the future generations. It will also look at a global digital compact. So how do countries come together around these 3 aspects: peace and security, future generations, and digital cooperation? All of these will be annexed to the Pact of the Future, which will be the main outcome from the Summit of the Future. And the Pact of the Future is expected to deliver the political direction for transformation and will inform the reform of the global governance and financial architecture, as I mentioned. So it is really something that hopefully, when agreed, we will all find ourselves coming together to be able to accompany the implementation of it. Earlier on today, I was still on this campus talking to the United Nations Association of South Africa, some young people, about the outcome from the Summit of the Future and what is it that we need to all be thinking about, what we will do. And the question that was asked was, all these commitments that governments go and make at the international level, is it really worth the paper on which they are written? Because implementation is not going in the direction it needs to be going. And so my challenge was, but what are we doing and what are young people doing at their level to reimagine a different future and solutions that need to take us to the outcomes that we want? Be it through the choices of what they study, the choices of what sort of businesses they will get into, or employment opportunities they will prepare themselves for, and when they start making money, the choices of where they invest the money in terms of the shares they may buy or not buy, the food they consume or not consume, the areas of a city they choose to live in, most importantly, the votes that they cast and for who and why, and how they enforce the accountability through their elected officials that they need to as well. And how policymakers like ourselves facilitate, enable, and accompany that. It's also then a collective responsibility, like I was saying. And you have an opportunity to play an active role vis-a-vis your government, the private sector conglomerate, how you study, what you study, how you organize, and not only agonize. So I think it is important that we think about all of those things. And South Africa, I must say, has been playing a commendable role in the African group at the United Nations to lead this thinking about a global agreement and outcome that speaks to the priorities of Africa. And the question is, are you aware of that? Are you shaping that? I was also asked earlier today, how come young people are not part of the South African and other delegations that go to the UN? Because if you're talking about the outcome that recognizes the importance of current and future generations and young people, why aren't young people at the table? There is provision for youth delegates, for example, coming to the UN and into UN intergovernmental processes, but not enough countries add young people into their delegations beyond just the civil servants. There's provision for that. So it's about how we can work on that. Karabo, I don't know why you're not on the delegation, for example, but it is an ask to be made, certainly. And when I met with the CEO of SAIIA in Johannesburg at WITS a few weeks ago, I put this on the table and we discussed this as well. As the conversation is happening, this has to be an ask of the government to say, add young people to your delegation. Because we need to ensure that the outcome is inclusive, equitable, bold, and brave. And young people are the ones that can make sure that happens. And so to be able to get the sort of multilateral system that we need one that is responsive to and commensurate with the challenges the world is facing, particularly the challenges that the African continent is facing. We need a system that helps us deliver for people and planet. We need a system that helps to address the uncertainties and instabilities that we're facing that holds us back from shared prosperity and a peaceful and sustainable world. And I said earlier, we need networked and inclusive multilateral cooperation, unlike what was envisaged in 1945, much bolder, broader, and fit for purpose for today's world. And so the Pact of the Future really needs to lead us into that world. Whatever is agreed in New York is not worth the paper it's written on if we are not working on implementing it together. If after what comes out of New York, there isn't a further conversation organized hopefully by Sean and SAIIA about, so what does this mean for us going forward and how do we play our part? What does this mean for the government of South Africa and the stakeholders in South Africa to be able to play their part? What does this mean for the government of national unity, especially as it finalizes a midterm development plan into the future? The United Nations South Africa certainly will be playing its part, working with the government and stakeholders to envision what our next cooperation framework needs to look like. We have a 5-year cooperation framework, which we renegotiate every year, informed by all these multilateral outcomes, and also the National Development Plan and other things. And so it's really, I think, a good time for the summit to be happening. The SDG summit happened. South Africa prepared its voluntary national review on the Sustainable Development Goals, its 30-year review of democracy in progress. So there's a lot of assessments about what the challenges are and what the opportunities are going forward. And so it's not about thinking about what needs to be done, really. It's about getting together and making it happen as quickly as possible, and with everyone playing their part, including the private sector in South Africa and young people. And of course, this is something that we're ready as the United Nations here and beyond to support, to accompany, to engage with, because we have to ensure that the outcomes we're working on delivers for you all and for our continent. So friends, I think it's really important that we think about the opportunities ahead of us. Yes, we're mindful of the challenges that we face, but we cannot be daunted by these challenges. We have to be hopeful and collaborative in facing head-on what needs to be done. We're in the midst of countless challenges. If you want to talk about climate change, you want to talk about unsustainable debt or conflicts, you want to talk about the food security challenges, human displacement, the technological gaps, extreme poverty, youth unemployment. The list goes on. But the opportunities are there. And the opportunities are in the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, the to-do list for people and planet, as I call them. So we also have, as a continent, and certainly as South Africa, immense potential. Not least critical minerals, a youthful population, financing that sits in banks that is not really being spent in what it needs to be spent because the risk profile and concerns are high. The renewable energy potential, wind, solar, thermal, is huge. So we really, as a continent and as a country, have the opportunities there. And it's really about the entry points to making a difference and how we collaborate and whether we are merchants of hope or despair. And I think we have our work cut out for us to be able to ensure that we make progress on quality healthcare, quality education, quality social services, energy affordability, security and transition, sustainable livelihoods and housing and accommodation, rights for all, an inclusive approach to living. Because these are the things that are at the heart of what the summit can deliver for Africa and for all of us. And with South Africa actually going into next year as the president of the G20, coming after we had Indonesia, China, India, Brazil, and now successive presidencies of the group of 20 from the global south, leading an agenda about rebalancing and fostering global solidarity, equality, and sustainable development. There is a leadership opportunity to make a difference, a lasting difference that will contribute to the outcomes of the Sustainable Development Goals, but also the Summit of the Future. For the very first time, foreign ministers of G20 countries will meet during the UN General Assembly on the margins of the Summit of the Future in New York to talk about reform of the UN, taking forward the outcomes from the Summit of the Future. And South Africa will be at the president level, leading those conversations alongside the current president of the G20 Brazil. So we have opportunities there to promote an agenda that will lead to Africa benefiting significantly. The guns being silent, as Agenda 2063 calls for. Africa, hopefully, getting a permanent seat on the Security Council with veto power, as has been called for. Financing for development and climate change financing being on the table. And all the commitments about unlocking the potential of young people also being taken seriously and forward. And it's only by working together, accompanying this process, ensuring that our leaders are keeping to their promises and engaging seriously, that we can make the progress that is important. So as I move towards the conclusion of what I had prepared to say, I think you all, and SAIIA especially, playing its part, and its partners, and the young people in the audience, have a responsibility and an opportunity to seize. We are here to accompany this effort, to support it, to understand it better, to ensure that young people are not only listened to, but given the opportunity to lead, shape, to foster the intergenerational conversations that are important, to learn from the failures of the old generation, but take advantage of the experiences as well and the lessons learned going forward. And the UN has been trying to ensure that young people, through the recently established Office of the Assistant Secretary General on Young People, on Youth, as well as other processes, can shape this collective outcome that is necessary. And we will keep on doing that into the future. So let me end with a quote from my boss, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, who says that the summit of the future is a chance to push progress on the issues that matter to you and to us. A chance that cannot be missed. Our fight is one fight, creating a better world and a brighter future for all. So together, let's seize this chance and make the summit of this future really count. And I add, really counting means it's not what the world leaders go and discuss in New York, make speeches, engage in dialogues, including over the action weekend that will have stakeholders come in and out and talk about what is important to them. Is what happens when the rubber hits the road back on the ground and at home. How you're all involved in taking forward the agreements that emerge from the global level, which by and large complement what is already on the cards in South Africa. South Africa has an arsenal of amazing plans, legislation, possibilities. South Africa helps shape what is agreed at the global level, by and large. And so it's about implementing it collectively, inclusively, with everyone playing their part and benefiting from it. And I'm very, very hopeful about what I see, particularly in the middle cohort there in this room, and the role that can be played in shaping our shared future. So I thank you, Sean, and I thank you, colleagues, and I thank everyone who's online as well. And I look forward to robust engagement and discussion.
Many thanks, Nelson. I think you more than delivered on the promise that your title, your role, and your history suggested you would do for us this evening. Let me leave you with a thought, because I want to come to Karabo. The reason that we asked Karabo, who happens to be on the exco of the Western Cape branch of SAIIA, and she's on that exco as the lead student liaison representative, specifically to the University of Stellenbosch. That means that she articulates positions, listens to what the university itself and its student body want, feed that back into the exco of SAIIA, and as a consequence brings about the sort of dialogue that Nelson has just been speaking of. That's what we need now. Nothing is going to change because of a number of documents adopted before the end of September in New York. Nothing. I was involved at a stage when Nelson was a young man with Kofi Annan's high-level panel on reform of the United Nations system. Not much happened. And the reason was there was no appetite for undertaking the changes that this high-level panel of very sensible people, very modestly, very rationally proposed, but the appetite wasn't there, so it didn't happen. And now, probably outside of the group of 20 or 30 who were involved with it, only academics remember it.
Yeah.
It's disappeared completely from the scene. Don't let that happen to the Pact for the Future. Karabo, you come and tell us why.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Karabo Mangena. I'm a SAIIA scholar, and I'm not so good at public speaking, but I'm going to try, right? When I got this role, I thought of what angle am I gonna touch this with? And I am doing my master's in politics, and I'm focusing on the state of democracy in South Africa. So obviously the angle that I looked at the Pact of the Future, the Summit of the Future, was from a democratic perspective, right? And I looked at how the UN views democracy. And it is a core value. It is a principle that supports the promotion of human rights, development, and peace and security. Very much in line with what we're going through with the meta crises that are happening around the world, right? And the Pact of the Future mentions that they aim to eradicate poverty, inequalities, and environmental crisis, which are definitely in line. But how do we do this in a way that accommodates all that have fallen victim to it, right? Meaning the developing states. How do we look at the fact that poverty is dehumanizing and it's already an infringement on human rights? Inequalities cause a stagnancy in developing states, and environmental crises cause the insecurity of food insecurity, basically, to a certain demographic. And the alternative to that, or the solution to food insecurity, has been food security. But I've had to relook at the definition of food security and what it is. It basically is access to food and nutrition, right? And what developing states need is food sovereignty, which is control over this food that we're getting. One, understanding how to work with nature and recognizing the sacredness of food so that one can have the means to produce this. And instead of getting importing like most of our food from other states, leaving us dependent on developing states once again, and leaving us dependent on financial aid and all these things that are sort of an entrapment that doesn't promote or doesn't show the true essence of what democracy should be, right? So from my perspective, I think there needs to be a reimagination of what democracy is. And I am standing here to say also the youth needs to look at what democracy is. And I bet a lot of South Africans are even saying that it hasn't been working, right? But it is a principle. I need all to understand that it is a principle that is supposed to accommodate all. At the moment, what we have is a principle or a form of governance that is majority rule and minority rights. The problem with that is when majority is ruling, it can define the rights of the minority. So for example, what we have with food insecurity, the solution being food security is something that has been defined by those that are in the majority. And what we need is food sovereignty, where one can define their own needs and get what they need. Am I making sense? So yes, what we need to do is reimagine democracy as a system of where institutions, policies, laws follow democratic principles such as obviously transparency, accountability, active participation in decision-making. And the goal is to create an effective and responsive government that meets the needs of all its constituents. And I changed the definition from all its citizens to all its constituents, because in our understanding, or in us understanding the interconnectedness of us as beings to each other, we also need to understand the interconnectedness of us with the world and the environment we live around. So in our approach of democracy, or trying to practice the a form of governance that's democratic, we need to look at how we affect the world. So looking at an ecological governance perspective. Yes, because if not, then we are going to live in a utilitarian world where one man's utopia is another man's dystopia, which is exactly what's happening. There are so many wars that are happening around the world, and somehow we can just sit in a room and talk. Such things make us feel detached from a reality of another person. And that's not actually what we're supposed to be doing. We need to be more involved. We need to be in touch with the humility part of who we are, right? Yeah, so the futures of democracy, what it should be in the future, or what we should be doing right now is looking or exploring its shortcomings and avenues, and looking at avenues for improvement, criticizing what the sciences of democracy is. Because what has happened to democracy is it became a formula. It became, hey, elections. And I wanted to mention democracy in this conversation because I want the youth to also understand that it goes beyond voting. It goes beyond the 24th of May, I think, or the 29th of May. It is a practice. It's a principle that we need to practice on our everyday lives in every room that we, in all the rooms that we enter into. And yeah, I guess that's also what I am doing as part of the youth in working towards a better future for myself and hopefully for the next generation. Another comment that I wanted to put out is we need more of the youth to be involved in future studies. The future studies has been this eye-opening field that has made me hopeful of the future. I thought we were doomed and nothing was going to be great in the future until I got into the futures program. And now suddenly I understand that one can actually, or yes, organizations can work and mitigate the opportunities and the challenges that come with the future. And I honestly believe in democratization to a point that I think it is the answer. If we give everyone a seat at the table and tell them and ask them, what exactly do you need? Then we'll get the answer and the solution to these things. Yes, and in essence, I think what we're trying to get to when we're talking about true democracy is Ubuntu, where again, I am because you are, but so is the earth. So is everything. When I'm planting things according to seasons and everything, it is because I understand that it feeds me. So there's this system that exists that we have become ignorant of, or like, we just think there's a self-interest perspective that we have absorbed that is very detached to the realities. And I think by understanding or looking at the world from a systematic approach, then we could do better. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Karamba. I want to pick up on your primary theme of democracy. Why do we have governments? Who needs a government? Why do we have a government? I don't mean we don't need a government, but I'm asking a serious question. Why do we have a government? We have a government to enhance well-being. It includes law and order. It includes safety and security. It includes economic opportunity. It includes sustainability, which is essentially equity from one generation to the next, but it's all about enabling well-being. What happened in the 18th century, this is an old man talking, don't take it too seriously, but what happened in the 18th century was that sovereignty of the sovereign became sovereignty of the people. So the people became sovereign. What does it mean for the people to be sovereign? It means they're in charge. It means they are the ultimate arbiters of what constitutes well-being and how it should be advanced. The idea that somebody who is paid by the taxpayers to occupy a political or a public service position is in charge is the antithesis of the sovereignty of the people. Now, that doesn't mean we want anarchy. It doesn't mean we want chaos. It doesn't mean we want revolution. We just want an understanding on the side of the people that they have to exercise their sovereignty in a responsible way through their elected representatives in order to advance their well-being. That's the essence, I think, of what you were saying. So that's the challenge now. What Nelson set out is an opportunity that has been created by the leadership of the United Nations, and more power to Antonio Guterres for having created this opportunity around the 75th anniversary. But it's an opportunity to look at that at a global level in exactly the same way as was done in respect of COP15 around climate and Agenda 2030 around the SDGs. National consultations fed into regional consultations, fed into a global compact. And out of that global compact came a set of objectives which states then had to think carefully about how they were going to achieve those things that they'd committed to. That's this. It's just on a much larger scale. If you think about the challenges, poverty, inequality, a technological revolution of the largest scale humanity has ever experienced, a financial architecture which is dysfunctional on many levels, and a peace and security system that isn't working. That's where we are. So the question is, what are you sovereign people going to do about it? That's roughly, I think, what you were probably asked by the United Nations Association as well this morning. But that's the essence of it. Don't hesitate to engage. Get your heads around some of that, and let's have some comments and some questions for both Nelson and Karabo. Did I see a hand? Sheila. Do introduce yourself and give some perspective on each occasion.
I'm Vice Chair of the Western Cape branch, and I'm also a member of Diplomats Without Borders, and I work on the multilateral subcommittee of this organization. And we have made a submission to the Pact to the Future, and we've asked that we go back to basics, that the United Nations goes back to basics, the Charter, in other words, because as you said yourself, the main problem is peace and security isn't working, and that means the Security Council isn't working. And so I wanted to ask you, you said that, here, let me see what you said here. You mentioned what countries need to do better, and I'm asking you, what does the United Nations need to do better? And is it fit for purpose, particularly the Security Council? Because just coming back to Africa, if you consider the Sudan, there's an appalling conflict where thousands and thousands of people are being killed all the time. And they're on the brink of famine. So thousands and thousands of non-combatants are going to die of hunger. That's Africa for you. And it's because the United Nations not working. So would you like to comment?
I'm going to take 3 questions so that we get something, and then you chaps pick the ones you want to respond to. Next year. Just turn it on.
Hi everyone. My name is Songe Zungaule. From Makopula Secondary School in Stellenbosch. I'm a grade 11 learner and I'm also the head boy. I have a question for Mr. Nelson. 2 questions actually. You
You can say one
Um,
head boy, right?
you mentioned about the dangers of technology, but you didn't go more or far beyond the dangers of technology, and also about the inequality. What have the UN already done to try and end inequality in Africa? The last question is, what role does the youth have to play in the summit of the future? I thank you.
Thanks very much. Can I just get the mic back? Have we got a 3rd question for this round? Anyone else want to jump in now? Come on, there you go. All right, you've got it. You're next. Okay.
Yes. Hello, everyone. My name is Lela Menziwa, and I'm also from Makupula, and I'm also a grade 11 learner. So Mr. Muffuh also did mention about involving the youth in the United Nations. So I was asking, I have a question to ask, and which says, does the UN plan to include the youth and listen to their perspectives about the future? Because it doesn't matter if people, as Mr. said, that old people, of course, might not be here for the next 25 years. But if young people were to be were to attend these meetings and summits, and of course, they would learn about how we could, sorry, yes.
Go on.
People could, now the youth could learn about on how to manage resources efficiently so that we can save for the next generation, which is our generation, really. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Good evening. My name is Asaki Zukufa, and I'm a grade 10 learner in Makapula Secondary School. So my question is, how can we as a youth think about the future of the next generation when China is already living in it? As Mr. said that, you said that, Mr. said that we old people are gonna die someday. So like, how as how as a youth are like involved in this when we're already seeing China like involved in all this, like living on what we must think of. So can you please answer that? Thank you.
Let's take those 3 as a point of departure. We'll take it. We'll let a man speak first. This is unusual, but we'll do it on this occasion. I think yours is still running from there.
With Karabo's permission, I will go first and take the easy questions and leave the more complex ones to her, because it's been a long time since I thought about these complex issues of inclusive governance and getting things working. But I think that with regards to technology, I guess the point I was making is let's not only focus on the dangers of technology, but the opportunities and how to ensure it is governed properly. And by governance, I mean inclusively governed and serving people, and not just governed by those who have the resources to be able to create it and build multinationals around it, but do it in a way that advances human rights and economic opportunities for all. And so the opportunities are major. Technology can help us leapfrog, just like the Industrial Revolution helped humanity also leapfrog. Technology being deployed into education, into healthcare, into agriculture, into energy, into urbanization can be that game changer. And so it's how it's governed and made more accessible for all. Look at AI, for example, the biases that are inbuilt, still northern male driven and not enough female and southern. So what needs to be done to ensure that technology as it is being developed and put at our disposal responds to our needs and it's as inclusive as possible. Because with digital connectivity, access to mobile phone data, satellite data, artificial intelligence, data crunching, we can transform humanity. And so it's about that opportunity that we need to seize going forward. And that really, I think it's an opportunity there. I talked about inequalities. It remains a persisting problem and needs to be addressed. The wealth in the world still disproportionately is in the hands of just a few. And it's about really how we ensure that more people can share in the prosperity, and those who are not able to also have social protection put in place, not building a culture of dependency, which is what the UN has been working on to ensure that we expand social protection, but not building a culture of dependency and creating opportunities through skilling, upskilling, reskilling, and other means to ensure that people can also generate a living for themselves, either by getting jobs or by becoming entrepreneurs to be able to create jobs for others. So that's basically what the UN across the continent, including in South Africa, through the International Labour Organization, through the World Bank that's part of the UN system, through UNDP, through UN Women, we're doing. In South Africa right now, looking at the just energy transition opportunity, which is really about moving from a fossil fuel dependent energy system progressively into a renewables-based system. The question there is, how will women and young people take advantage or be skilled to be able to take advantage of this? And so the interventions we are working with government and others to do is to ensure that young people are skilled, what is called as green skills for the future, to be part of this ecosystem that will drive forward and benefit from the transition, and women as well, on digitization, training women on e-commerce. There's a lot of that we're doing right now. And this is really about trying not to necessarily level the playing field, but give opportunities for others to be meaningful actors in socioeconomic transformation. So, and I think that's really important. With regards to the Summit of the Future and Youth, I mentioned at the end and in passing the action days. Action days are the 2 days that will happen on the Friday and the Saturday before the Summit of the Future starts on the Sunday, which is really about bringing in young people and other stakeholders from around the world to talk about the outcomes and taking forward the outcomes of the Summit of the Future. There's a youth consultation and a youth day that will happen. The Assistant Secretary General for Youth, Philippe Polier, is organizing and leading that, and the newly established Office on Youth Affairs at the UN, which wasn't there a year ago, is now in place to really engage, come up with platforms and create opportunities for young people to inform multilateral deliberations and outcomes. So that's an opportunity there going forward. The Summit of the Future itself, the outcome document, has a chapter, the Pact of the Future chapter, on youth and future generations. And it focuses on action areas where young people will be empowered, allowed, enabled to shape and be part of the process going forward. And so we are all doing that. In the South African context, last week in Johannesburg, we had a youth imbizo with NYDA, the National Youth Development Agency, which was to look at what are the opportunities and the spaces for young people to be able to play a part going forward. With the Youth Employment Scheme, the Presidential Youth Employment Initiative, we're all working together to look at bridging also this gap. You're probably not yet there, but soon, hopefully, of you graduate from uni, you don't have enough experience to be able to get a paying job. How do you get the skills that employers need for you to be able to do the job that needs to be done? So this fellowship, apprenticeship opportunities being put at the disposal of young people, because if you want to be serious about solving the challenge of youth unemployment, then you need to address the skills gap and also the experience gap. And so what can be done and what needs to be done about that, because you cannot then continue in a circumstance where you have a lot of vacancies and a lot of unemployed people and graduates, and that's not being addressed. So we are also trying to accompany that effort. And I mean, at the UN Association for South Africa dialogue earlier on today, there was a question about how do young people become part of official delegations at the UN? because there's provision for that. And so it's really about countries, and in the South African context, the Department of International Relations and Cooperation agreeing, determining, and making resources available for young people to formally be part of their delegation to the Summit of the Future, to the General Assembly, to the ECOSOC, to all the other international processes. So that's something that we need to keep on doing. And the UN has a number of initiatives. Finally, on the youth thing, we just launched on International Youth Day, what we're calling Generation Unlimited, which is an initiative about empowering young people to be able to socioeconomically contribute to their countries. It's a global initiative that has just been launched in South Africa with UNICEF, UNFPA, ILO, UNDP, and others playing a role. And so that's watch that space. Is work in progress, and it's an opportunity that I think we can take advantage of going forward. And other countries are showing what is possible to envision the future and work towards the future. We just need to make sure enough countries are also playing their part in doing that. And whilst learning from others, also engendering their own processes that will help take advantage of technology, plan for the future, and work with young people. And I hope you play your part in envisioning that future and pushing for that future and building the alliances that will help us achieve that. But please, over to you.
Except
I asked about the UN being the purpose.
Oh yes. Oh, sorry. Sorry. I'm dodging that one. So the UN certainly, I mean, and I said that when I was also laying out the challenges. Security Council needs to be reformed. The Secretary General has been unapologetic about the need to ensure equitable governance in the Security Council that reflects the realities of today and corrects the inefficiencies and inequalities of the past. When the Security Council was established, African countries were by and large colonized. So in 1945, you probably do not have, if any, African country as a member of the UN that could join the Security Council. Ethiopia, Liberia at the time. And that needs to be quickly course-corrected, not only by having a permanent member of Africa, but also with veto power, and also expanding that to other regions that
Can you say, what do you think will happen? Do you think we'll achieve that? You think
no, we're not at the Summit of the Future. What is envisaged in the Summit of the Future and in the outcome document is a process, it's a commitment to scale up the process to resolve that. It is a recognition that Africa needs to have a seat. It's a recognition that the veto power needs to be looked at and limited. It's a recognition that, it's because it's a separate process that deals with that. So what you see in the outcome document version 3 as it currently stands is the need to expedite discussions and resolution on that, and an acknowledgement that there are things that need to be rectified. And under the presidency of Sierra Leone, whose last month was the president of the Security Council, there was a high-level meeting with Professor Mbete from South Africa speaking at it, University of Pretoria, making this point as well, and a recognition that things need to be quickly handled. But beyond the Security Council, the UN has the funds, agencies, and programs and the other pillars that are increasingly, particularly on the development front, more fit for purpose. The reform and repositioning of the UN system on the development side is something that I worked on tirelessly for more than 5 years before coming to South Africa, which has led now to the UN development entities, humanitarian and human rights, working slightly better together. The whole ethos was about, are we fit for purpose to accompany governments and people to deliver on the sustainable development goals? Are we planning together? Are we delivering in an aligned manner? Are we aligned to national development plans? Are we ready to partner and work beyond just UN agencies and the government with private society and private sector and civil society? And we are now doing that. So that's the being fit for purpose part on that part of the UN. The security part is work in progress, needs to be quickly resolved. And the Secretary General is very clear about the need for that. Actually, one of the things he's most outspoken on, it's about that need. The reform of the global financial and global governance architecture is also something that the Secretary General is pushing. And we expect the South African G20 presidency to play its part in also advancing that agenda. And right now there are conversations about shaping the theme, the focus areas that South Africa will be pushing, building on what Brazil is currently doing. So there's a movement, certainly nowhere close to where it needs to be. And we need to keep on working at it.
Right, I've got.
Well, we
Yeah,
come to-
take that, I'm going to take
Mm.
that. I can only manage 3 units here, it's going to.
Thank you. Terry Crawford Brown, a member of SAIIA. The United Nations maintains an estimated 850 military bases in Europe, Asia, and Africa. And in Africa, these include Diego Garcia, in defiance of which the US continues to maintain that base in violation of the International Court of Justice and the United Nations. The US is also notorious for for abusing its veto powers. My question is, why do you propose veto powers for Africa? Wouldn't it be better to abolish all use of veto powers?
Hi, my name is Solam. I'm a grade 10 learner from Makupula High, and I have this question: how can young generation, how can the system be enforced? Because I ask that because there might be some of us who won't be able to resonate with how things are being done in the system. And how do you know it will be applicable to the generations to come? Thank you.
That one is for you.
Thanks very much. So let's take this and then we take one more.
I'm on your mailing list. I wanted to ask you, because for me, this veto is the elephant in the room. If China is not happy, they'll veto it. If Russia is not happy, they'll veto it. If America is not happy, they'll veto it. So the UN is a dog show. It can do absolutely nothing. It's supposed to do dog. And then they go there with the big egos. The people that go there, they go for a holiday. Seriously, they do nothing, absolutely nothing. It's a dog show.
That was a good provocative remark.
Good evening. Thank you so much to Karabo and David. I have a more general question and I have a more specific question. My more general question is that as a believer in the UN was formed in part to ensure that negotiations take place with transparency in a multilateral global stage. And yet what we see when the UN is not fit for purpose in the way that we would like it to be, is that we see the emergence of groups and individual countries and regions like Africa moving away from that. They start negotiating between themselves and pushing for more power amongst themselves rather than on the multilateral stage. Is there room for the UN to change? Does the UN's position on transparency and multilateral negotiations change as a result of this? I suppose that speaks to who would take on permanent membership and representing the African continent on this permanent security as a permanent member of the Security Council. In terms of, so that's my first question. In terms of specifically the Summit of the Future, there are two things there that I was just interested in. The one is that the Malala Foundation has been increasingly pushing amongst other countries to recognize gender apartheid as a specific term that aims to ensure human rights for particularly women who are not recognized and who do not have their basic rights recognized in countries. And particularly considering that that is not only the case in Afghanistan, but also in many countries on the African continent. Is this something, or how should African delegations put forward or discuss this issue at the summit? And
No, I'm sorry, I must, in the interest of giving everyone a shot. 2 is good, but 3 would be pushing it. Viva, I understand you have some questions online. Can you share those with us?
Okay, this is from Lungisa Huna from Rural Women Assembly. Can you comment on the use of agroecological approach and not industrial agriculture, which is destructive and uses pesticides, GMOs, and chemicals? These exacerbate climate disaster, food insecurity. Secondly, what is your take on criminalization of indigenous and traditional seeds? Sean?
I don't know what I'll say to that.
Let's see what we can do with those. And
Let's start with Caribou.
all right.
Mm-hmm.
Go for it. You're in charge.
I'm going to answer the question about being involved in the system. I think you asked. I think what we have as the youth at the moment is what is already given to us. I will say democracy is a great system or principle that was given to us, and it has evolved throughout the years. And we, as the youth, have an opportunity right now to reimagine it and make it accommodate. Like we've seen it at play and in practice, and we already know its shortcomings as a person who's experienced it. And therefore, now you have the opportunity to actually say something, or let's say work towards advancing it as a principle of governance. So be involved in different conversations. This is a perfect platform, and other conversations that talk about different systems that we have in place and how we can improve it. That's when you come in and talk about your personal experience and how you think you could actually benefit from it if it worked in a different way. Yes.
No, thank you for that. I'm not sure I have the answers to the questions, and I take them more as reflections and comments and points of opinion that people are putting on the table. But let me make this phrase that I'm sure, Sean, you've heard before, that the UN wasn't established to take the world to heaven, but to save us from hell. That's not me being defensive. That's me saying, realistically, the problems and the spheres of intervention that a multilateral system can help us with is to prevent us from, I would say, eliminating each other. It does not promise that all conflicts and all challenges will be addressed through the UN, but that the UN will help us create a platform, as the Deputy Secretary General always refers to, a global town hall for the global village, to just have a space where there's equitable, inclusive discussions about the challenges we're facing, and hopefully solutions will emerge from that. So it's a wonder that the 17 SDGs even emerged from the UN as a beacon for what we need to be doing with regards to the well-being of people and planet. And I always ask the question, who's the UN? Is it the Security Council alone? Is it the General Assembly with all the 193 member states? Is it the agencies, funds, and programs? We typically always look at the UN through the prism of a Security Council that is in deadlock. But there's much more that the UN does across the board on human rights, on peace and development, on climate change. So it's work in progress, and it needs to be adapted and updated to reflect the world we are facing today, to deal with persisting, emerging, and future challenges. And as countries and leaderships change and come and go, it also has to respond to that. And so that's where we are in and what we're talking about. So I would say that with regards to some of the challenges that have been put on the table, member states especially need to have a frank conversation, an agreement, compromise even, on what to do about the veto power. what to do about peacekeeping, military bases, and everything else that has been raised, including GMO and others. It is down to member states agreeing, trading off their interests and agreeing on what is it that they would want to advance collectively, because that's the only way the UN gets to work. And as someone quoted today, actually in the earlier dialogue, I think a quote from Madeleine Albright, if the UN didn't exist, it would have to be created in the world we are right now to help us grapple with the challenges we're facing. It is not a perfect animal, but it is a necessary entity, multi-faceted, to help us deal with the problems that we're dealing with. And hopefully, the more we talk, engage, collectively reflect, and bring unusual stakeholders and bedfellows together, some solutions will emerge and we can implement that going forward.
Peter?
My name's Peter Sullivan. I'll be very brief. We have been talking about the aspirations of United Nations, and the second speaker talked about democracy and accountability. Is that not the most important thing to look at now? So many countries globally, not only in Africa, are suffering from corruption, which is stifling all progress and cost of living and standard of living. I wonder if the UN is doing anything about that.
Thanks very much. We'll give you one more shot, but not two questions.
Okay. How can we lead as how can we lead as a youth when we lack education, as we come from homes with poverty?
Hi everyone, I am Birahoti Moloto and I'm a fourth year Bachelor of Business Science student majoring in economics. My question, I don't know if Garaba will take this one, but Mr. Nelson also mentioned smart cities. And I was wondering, how do we transition to smart cities without undermining democracy, considering the socio-economic context of South Africa? For instance, in South Africa, there are, particularly in Cape Town, there are plans of implementing smart meters. How do we do that without denying the very poor access to water? For instance, isn't that going to get the same response that we had when prepaid meters were put in place, that people thought it was undermining democracy because people in Piri, in Soweto, when these meters were implemented, it was in these very areas where unemployment was rife, really high levels of poverty. They felt like the government was taking away their constitutional right to access to water. So I was wondering, how do we facilitate this transition without leaving the very poor behind?
I'll take one last question over here, because we're on this round, and if we can squeeze in one more, I will, but I'm not promising.
Okay, thank you. Maybe coupled with the issue of corruption, which is rampant throughout the world, the issue of stolen elections or election rigging, and some of these presidents, they end up attending the United Nations General Assembly, and they are given the floor to even speak there. What is the United Nations doing to empower maybe opposition parties in countries where they are literally beaten into submission by the people who have access to military power? There's like a complex between governance and the military, making sure that a certain group of people stay in power forever, and these people are not delivering. So what is the United Nations doing?
I'm going to exercise a certain degree of executive privilege. This chap actually runs an organization which is AI for good, but in the wider scheme of medical assistance, so he can possibly help answer some of the questions that were asked.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sean, and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ricardo Lee. I'm the foreigner in the room. Very grateful for this opportunity, invitation, and leaving this room very inspired to see such active youth here in Cape Town, thinking about, as said in the poster there, African perspectives, but with global insights, truly. And I'm from Portugal, but currently based in Geneva as I run the Global Agency for Responsible Artificial Intelligence in Health AI. And in my past, I'm a medical doctor, but I was also a member of parliament for 4 terms in my home country of Portugal. And I founded an organization called the Unite Parliamentarians Network for Global Health, which is a network of current and former legislators committed to health policy now in 112 countries. And I'm one of the old guys that's going to be at the Summit of the Future in 3 weeks in New York. And I'm very hopeful listening to this room about what may come out of this summit, especially of the impact it may have, because as I think it was Nelson was saying, how important it is what happens after September. And you were saying that, Sean, also. And thinking about artificial intelligence in the field of health particularly, we work with governments to build the regulatory capacity to make sure that AI is used responsibly, and which means that it is used fairly, that it is inclusive, that it is accountable, that it serves the purposes for which it can lead to well-being and to the improvement of health outcomes for everyone, which means that governments need to commit at an early stage of the technological development of the way we develop and deploy these technologies. Right now, we think about wars, we think about conflicts. If you look at the last patents report on AI, you see that 61% of all patents registered came out of China. 21% of the patents came out of the United States. 2% came out of the European Union plus UK. Africa is basically non-present. And if patents are a proxy of the future, this means we are in the face of a future of geopolitical tensions between 2 blocs led by the United States and China. And once again, Africa is left out of the picture. So innovation can lead to transformation, but you need to take that leadership role. And what I think is so challenging about discussing the future is we don't know what is coming. There are more unknown unknowns than actually what we're aiming for. A lot of the discussions we hear with the Summit of the Future is not discussing what may happen, but actually, how do we get access to things that already exist in places where they do not exist? And that's the opportunity, I think, here for Africa, thinking about healthcare. I still see in sub-Saharan Africa hospitals being built that will not have medical doctors to work in them. But we have this opportunity with technology and AI, if designed correctly, to leapfrog, to design a health system that does not depend so much on that Western view of health system, but actually creating something new. And it's that innovation that can come out of Africa and can actually lead the way, because health systems in the West are broken. We're seeing a rise of costs and a rise of burden of disease in the current model of care. And so I think that this should be the discussion when it comes to technology, not if we should use technology, but why. Why do we want to use AI? Why do we want to use these digital technologies? What is the outcome? What is the end game for education, for health, for our economies? Because that's the starting point. And then you retrofit. The technology must serve the people, not the other way around. And today, the people are serving the technology and the big technology companies. And so this is, I think, a huge opportunity for South Africa, because, and this is my question, South Africa will take on the presidency of the G20 at the end of this year. And I can tell you, there is tremendous hope that South Africa will be the leading voice for the continent and for the world. Because I think there is a unique opportunity coming after the Summit of the Future for the South African authorities to say, this is our chance with the presidency of the G20 to be able to be the voice for the world of how do we be accountable to the people that we serve, to make sure that we lead beyond what is signed in New York, and how do we make those promises actionable. So my question to both of you, as a young generation, a UN representative, is, do you believe that South Africa has what it takes and it has the willingness in its authorities to make sure that this change will happen? And I can just say also, don't forget, we always talk about governments, but leading the Unite Parliamentarians Network, don't forget parliamentarians who have the responsibility as direct representatives of the people to keep governments accountable. And they need to be an active voice in these discussions, representing not only majority powers, but also the minorities, to make sure that what you were mentioning, Karubo, that democracy actually has a representation within our democratic powers and within legislative organs like our parliaments around the world. Thank you, Sean.
As you can see, my executive privilege is well used.
Being able to take leadership of the G20 and other processes.
First of all, I'm very optimistic of what's happening in government right now with the GNU in place. I'm very optimistic of the accountable element of parliament, right? Because that's something we've struggled with for a long time. And I think having people to hold the people that are in power accountable works perfectly. However, the administration part might stall because we're talking about parties that have different policies in place, that others are very left, others are very right, and others are just trying to mitigate everything. So the administration of it, or the beginning of it, or trying to come to a consensus might take time. But eventually, I think the essence of it, they'll understand they need to serve the people. And with that, we can rest assured that everyone there is representing someone in the country, and therefore, whatever outcome is going to come, it probably is going to serve a certain demographic.
No, thank you for that. And I think you answered all the questions in your expose already, so I'm not going to go into a lot of those things. But just to say that to the point about democracy, corruption, accountability being a problem across the continent, especially, yes, like we couldn't agree more. It's certainly something that the UN is working on, not least through UNDP. We also have a UN Democracy Empowerment Fund. We have UN ODC, which is the part of the UN that works on corruption, crime, and drugs prevention. So there are a number of things that we look at to try to reinforce governance. And so that's why, for example, it is encouraging that, yes, one of the strategic priorities of the GNU, Government of National Unity in South Africa, it's about building a capable, ethical, and developmental state. And it's not only in South Africa, a number of countries across the continent are also trying to advance in that sense, to say you need a state that is ethical, capable, and focused on development outcomes. And how to then bring that about is something that the UN is accompanying countries to do that. In our cooperation framework with the government of South Africa, that is one of the pillars we're working on with the government of, with the Public Service Commission, the School of Government, and others, to also look at, is the state capable to deliver in the way it's meant to? And what is the benchmarking it is looking at as in comparison with other countries that have gone through or are going through similar challenges? And we bring that analysis and assessment to the table across the continent as well. So it is really important to not lose sight of that. With regards to education, I had mentioned that one of the transitions or catalytic interventions that are important to be able to make quick progress on the sustainable development goals is education systems, learning outcomes, learning skilling across the board. As the Deputy Secretary General actually always says, that you want people who are trained and skilled to be fit for purpose, to be able to enter into the marketplace and into societies and make a difference. Not only by getting jobs, but also being able to create jobs. And so that innovative approach to learning and the support that is needed is something that we are very much aware of and focusing on, because young people need that. If you look at, for example, the whole concept of green skills, who need to acquire those green skills to be able to help us sustainably develop, manufacture, industrialize, or generate energy. It's young people. And so that's really important. And it's a focus, I think, for everyone, and not only from the UN. And things like ensuring that there's universal access to education is a responsibility and a right, which the UN is asking governments to embrace and spend resources and attention in resolving. And in the South African context, we constantly hear of a skills gap or critical skills not being available, but what is then being done to ensure that the right training is provided to match what the economy needs. So we are also in that space, talking to different stakeholders and trying to come up with solutions for that. On smart cities, I mean, there's the concept which everyone seems to be talking about when it comes to the SDGs, is about leaving no one behind. So yes, grow, transform, evolve, but do it in a way that takes everyone along and does not disadvantage people. And so social protection becomes important. Necessary transformation with regards to smart metering, smart cities, better housing and human settlements need to look at those who cannot afford and how they need to be supported to be part of the transition, rather than saying we're not going to embrace the transition because some cannot afford it. What sort of systems can be put in place? What sort of dedicated financing and support packages can be put in place to address that is something that I think we're also working with governments to be able to take forward. And as we look at the future and AI for good, we also need to look at what are the resources that the world is leveraging to be able to technologically transform, and where those resources are. Critical minerals on the African continent by and large. And so what we do about this new scramble for Africa needs to take into consideration the mistakes of the old scramble for Africa and how it did not benefit the continent, and beneficiation did not happen. Who drives technology, who benefits from the raw materials and the resources, how is that governed for current and future generations? It's also another aspect of the picture that we're looking at, because I think that also is very, very important to be able to take forward.
Super. As they say, all good things must come to an end. I'm sorry, but we have committed to everyone to end this at 7:30, and we're at that witching hour right now. I want to offer you three thoughts, and I think they tie together both the disquiet, the unhappiness about the present state of things, and the ambition that is being described in many of the comments and observations. The United Nations was created by we, the peoples. It wasn't created by God. It wasn't created by Martians. It was created by we, the peoples. Clearly. And the first line in the Charter is to avoid seeing humanity plunged into another war from which we have now only emerged. That's precisely the context in which it arose. But understand what that means. If we, the peoples, created the United Nations, we, the peoples, are responsible. Not somebody else, not the United Nations. I'd love to be able to blame it on all of my good friends going back through the last 6 Secretaries General, but unfortunately I can't. We are responsible. The Secretary General wouldn't even have a salary if it wasn't paid by member states contributing to the budget of the United Nations. Why is the veto a problem in the Security Council? Because individual states exercise the veto. Why does the United Nations have enormous difficulty getting money to implement programs, the World Food Programme, relief programs? Why? Because people don't pay the money that they committed to pay under those circumstances. It's us. It was a wonderful cartoon at the end of the Vietnam War in the United States. It said, "We have met the enemy, and he is us." That's the problem. Now, apply that constructively. Where is accountability in the first instance? It's in national governments. Sovereignty of the people in the context of a democracy means you, as soon as you can vote, have the right and the obligation to hold your government accountable. And if everybody does that, 70 to 80% of these structural problems will go away. The international financial architecture will still be skewed. The charter of the International Monetary Fund and that of the World Bank will still have to be fundamentally reconsidered. A just energy transition will still have to be engineered because none of that was foreseen, not even in 2015 when we did the SDGs and COP15. All of that we'll have to do at the summit in the future and beyond. But understand it's your responsibility. And I'm not excluding me. My responsibility too, as long as I'm alive. It's our responsibility. Don't look for somebody else to blame. Ask, what can I do to make this work? We had some great questions from the center over here about how to get involved. Why don't you go back to your schools, to your departments, to your faculties, those of you who are at university, and say, you know, we spent a lot of time talking about the Summit of the Future, Impact for the Future, and Global Digital Compact and Declaration for New Generations. What are we doing about it? What can we at School X do to make a contribution into this process? What can the School of Economics do? You've got a tremendous amount of skill, knowledge, talent among faculty, among your postgraduate, and even your undergraduates around many of these challenges. How do we take back responsibility? If sovereignty of the people is real, use it. Don't waste time complaining. Seize the day. This is your opportunity. And I mean that absolutely sincerely. I'm not using it as a cliche. We're going to spend the next 5 to 10 years figuring out whether what ended up in the Pact for the Future is going to happen or not, and how. And all of you have a role to play in respect of that. That's why Ricardo is going to New York. He's not going to New York because he wants to go shopping. He can shop perfectly well, both in Geneva and in Lisbon, right? And in Cape Town, yes. The important thing is you go to make a difference. Take that on yourselves. That's the challenge. Governments are responsible for the UN. People are responsible for their governments. That's what democracy is all about. Figure out how to make that happen. It's your world. You know, there's a wonderful thing. I don't know if any of you have flown through Dubai. They created this rather remarkable thing called the Museum of the Future, which has a tremendous amount of rather elegantly done Arabic calligraphy on it. But it actually goes to one single point, and it goes to where Karabo started on futurism or future studies. It's a remark that was made by Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum, the ruler of Dubai, in 2014. I happened to be there when he did it. He did it for the World Government Summit. And what he said was, the future belongs to those who can imagine it, design it, and execute it. It's not something you await, he said. It's something you create. That's the challenge. If you can imagine the future you want, if you can think about how you might put it together, and if you can then work together collectively to create it, you own the future. And you own the future for the benefit of humanity. That's the challenge. Wherever we are in society, that's the challenge that we face, and that's the opportunity that Nelson has laid out for you today. Let me just say firstly that we owe a great debt of gratitude to Efenike Laudu, who, as the head of the Department of Economics at the University of Cape Town, was kind enough to give us access to the school this evening for this purpose. And of course, to Anthony Black, former head of the school and the intermediary in respect of engineering this and a great friend of SAIIA. So to them as well, our enormous thanks in respect of this evening. Thank you very much. And please don't walk out of here saying it was interesting. Walk out of here saying, I'm going to make it happen. Off you go. Thanks.